London, 1815. Miss Winifred Ellis possessed a temperament as changeable as April weather, and a fortune just adequate enough to make her interesting to the gentlemen of the ton. At 23, she had developed a philosophy on marriage that she considered impenetrable. It was a business arrangement, nothing more, and she would enter into it with the same coolness with which one might purchase a bonnet, necessary, perhaps even pleasant, but certainly not a matter of the heart. A marriage without affection is the only sensible kind, Winifred declared to her younger sister Louisa as they prepared for Lady Harrington's ball. Love is a temporary madness that fades before the wedding breakfast is cleared away. Louisa, still in the first flush of romantic notions at 18, looked horrified. "Winnie, you cannot mean that. What of happiness? What of companionship?" "Companionship can be purchased with a good settlement, and happiness is merely comfort by another name." Winifred adjusted her pearl earrings before the mirror. The sage green silk of her gown complemented her auburn hair, arranged in fashionable curls that softened her rather determined jaw. "I shall marry a man with a steady income and agreeable manners who will not interfere with my life. That is all." Her mother entered the room in a flutter of lace and nerves. "Winifred, I've just heard the most extraordinary news. The Duke of Stratham has returned to London, and they say he'll be at Lady Harrington's tonight." Xavier Sherborne. Winifred's carefully composed expression faltered for the briefest moment. "I thought he meant to remain in the country indefinitely." "Well, he's back and still unmarried at 38. Oh, if you could catch his eye." "Mamma, I have no intention of catching any man's eye like a fishmonger with a trout," Winifred replied crisply, though her heart had begun an inconvenient gallop. "Besides, his grace hardly notices anyone below the rank of countess." Yet as their carriage rolled toward Harrington House, Winifred could not help but remember the Duke as she had last seen him 5 years ago, tall and imposing, with sharp grey eyes that seemed to see too much, and that sardonic mouth that rarely smiled except when making particularly cutting observations about society's follies. Lady Harrington's ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, the light catching on jewels and polished boots as the cream of society whirled about the dance floor. Winifred kept her expression pleasantly neutral as she and her family entered, though her eyes darted about the room in defiance of her own resolve. And then she saw him. Xavier Sherborne, the Duke of Stratham, stood in conversation with Lord Pembroke, his broad shoulders perfectly displayed by immaculate evening attire, his dark hair styled in the fashionable Brutus crop that somehow looked more elegant on him than on other men. He had aged well, the passing years adding a distinguished touch of silver at his temples without diminishing his commanding presence. As if sensing her regard, he turned, and for one breathless moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Winifred looked away first, annoyed at the betraying warmth in her cheeks. "Miss Ellis." The deep voice came from behind her not 20 minutes later, as she pretended interest in the potted palms. Winifred turned, composing her features into polite surprise. "Your Grace, how unexpected to see you in London." "Is it?" One dark eyebrow rose slightly. "I rather thought everyone in town had been informed of my arrival before my own carriage had stopped at Stratham House." "Not everyone concerns themselves with the comings and goings of dukes, Your Grace." No, the faintest suggestion of amusement touched his lips. "Yet I distinctly remember a time when you were quite concerned with my movements. Or have you forgotten our last meeting at Lady Windermere's garden party? I believe you called me an insufferable aristocrat with the emotional depth of a teaspoon." Winifred felt heat rise to her face. "I was 19 and foolish then. And now? Now I am 23 and recognize that strong opinions are unbecoming in a lady." "How disappointing." He studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. "I rather preferred the forthright Miss Ellis who spoke her mind, even when her observations were unflattering to dukes." Before Winifred could formulate a suitably cutting reply, the Duke bowed slightly. "Would you do me the honor of dancing the next set?" Against her better judgment, she accepted. As they took their positions for the country dance, Winifred forced herself to remember why she had vowed never to think of Xavier Sherborne again. 5 years ago, during her first season, he had singled her out at several events, engaging her in conversations that had made her young heart race with possibility. Then, without warning or explanation, he had departed London for his country estates, leaving her to face the whispers and pitying glances of the ton who had noted his attentions. "You've grown quiet, Miss Ellis," the Duke observed as they circled each other. "No sharp observations about my dancing, no critique of my cravat. I've learned the value of silence, Your Grace." "A pity." "Your conversation was one of the few things that made London society bearable." The dance separated them momentarily, giving Winifred time to master her expression before they came together again. "You find London society unbearable, yet you've returned," she noted when they next met in the figures of the dance. "What changed?" Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been regret, had Winifred believed him capable of such an emotion. "Perhaps I realized that running from one's responsibilities solves nothing," he said quietly. "Or perhaps I simply tired of my own company." The music ended before she could respond, and he returned her to her mother's side with perfect courtesy. Yet as he walked away, Winifred felt that something fundamental had shifted, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Over the next fortnight, the Duke seemed to appear at every event Winifred attended. They danced twice more, conversed at dinners, and even found themselves in the same riding party in the park. Each encounter left her more confused than the last, for he treated her with a careful respect that seemed at odds with the sardonic man she remembered. "He's courting you," Louisa insisted one afternoon as they returned from a milliner's shop. "Everyone is talking about it." "Nonsense," Winifred replied, though her heart gave a treacherous leap. "The Duke does not court, he merely observes society as one might observe an unusual species of beetle." Yet when Xavier called at their townhouse the following day and requested a private word with her father, Winifred found her carefully constructed philosophy beginning to crumble. Her father emerged from his study looking both stunned and pleased. "The Duke has asked for your hand," he announced, his voice hushed with wonder. "A Duke, Winnie. He's offering a most generous settlement and says the wedding should take place as soon as the banns can be read." Winifred sat frozen, her needlework forgotten in her lap. "What did you tell him?" "That I would speak with you, of course, but that I had no objections." He peered at her anxiously. "You cannot mean to refuse. Think of the position, the security." She thought instead of grey eyes that revealed too little, of a man who had once walked away without explanation, of her own vow never to marry for affection. "I need time to consider," she said faintly, but society allowed little time for consideration. Within days, congratulations were pouring in, and Winifred found herself swept into a whirlwind of wedding preparations. The Duke remained correct but distant, calling at appropriate hours and bringing suitable gifts, yet never once speaking of affection or explaining his sudden decision to make her his duchess. "Perhaps he truly admires you," Louisa suggested as they examined wedding laces. "Perhaps he merely requires an heir and considers me biddable enough to serve the purpose," Winifred replied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. The night before their wedding, as Winifred sat alone in her bedchamber contemplating the emerald and diamond necklace Xavier had sent as a wedding gift, a footman arrived with a letter bearing the Duke's seal. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax and unfolded the single sheet. "My dear Miss Ellis, tomorrow you become my Duchess, yet I fear you may still view our union as merely a business arrangement. Perhaps that is what you wish it to be. If so, I will respect your desires and ask nothing more of you than what duty requires. But before you make that decision, I believe you deserve to know why I left London 5 years ago without explanation. It was not, as you may have thought, because I found your company wanting or because I was merely trifling with the affections of a young lady in her first season. The truth is that my cousin Edward, then my heir presumptive, was discovered to have embezzled funds from estates under my care, funds meant for tenants' improvements and workers' wages. When confronted, he threatened to spread rumors about you, vicious, baseless claims that would have destroyed your reputation and prospects. To protect you, I agreed to leave London immediately and to have no further contact with you. In return, he would remain silent, and I would settle his debts privately rather than expose him to prosecution. I have spent 5 years rebuilding what he destroyed and ensuring he could never again threaten anyone under my protection. His recent death from consumption has finally freed me to return to London and to you, if you will have me. I do not expect this explanation to erase the hurt I caused by my abrupt departure. I offer it only so that you might understand that my feelings for you have remained constant, even when circumstances forced me to appear inconstant. If, after reading this, you wish to cancel our wedding, I will accept your decision without protest or public explanation. My carriage will await your answer at dawn. Yours, with sincere admiration and deepest affection. X. Winifred read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so badly that the paper rustled continuously. 5 years of wounded pride and carefully constructed indifference collapsed like a house of cards before the simple, devastating truth. Xavier had left to protect her, not because he had tired of her company. Sleep proved impossible. As dawn approached, Winifred made her decision. St. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled to capacity with the cream of London society. The Duke stood at the altar, his face impassive as the minutes ticked by. The murmurs began at precisely 5 minutes past the hour, when the bride had still not appeared. At 10 minutes past, the great doors opened, and Winifred Ellis walked down the aisle alone, her ivory gown shimmering in the light filtering through stained glass. Her face was pale but composed as she took her place beside Xavier. As the ceremony began, he leaned closer and whispered, "You came." "I considered sending my regrets," she murmured. "But I found I could not." A flicker of what might have been relief crossed his features before his expression returned to aristocratic calm. The ceremony proceeded smoothly until the moment the bishop asked if anyone knew any reason why the couple should not be joined in matrimony. A sudden commotion at the back of the church drew all eyes as a disheveled man pushed his way forward. "I object," he shouted, his voice slurring. "The Duke is a fraud and a thief." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Xavier went rigid beside Winifred, his face draining of color. "Edward," he said in disbelief. "You're supposed to be dead." The man, clearly Xavier's supposedly deceased cousin, gave a wild laugh. "Disappointed, cousin. I thought it best to let you believe that while I gathered proof of your crimes." Xavier stepped forward, his voice dangerously soft. "What crimes would those be, precisely?" "You stole my inheritance, the entailed properties that should have come to me." "Were never yours to claim," Xavier interrupted coldly. "And you know full well why I removed you from the line of succession." "Your death changes nothing." Edward's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he snarled, reaching inside his coat. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Edward pulled out a small pistol. Xavier lunged forward. Winifred screamed. A shot rang out, echoing deafeningly in the vaulted space. Xavier staggered backward, crimson blooming across his pristine white waistcoat. In the chaos that followed, Edward was subdued by several gentlemen, the ladies screamed, and Winifred fell to her knees beside Xavier, heedless of her wedding gown. "No," she whispered, pressing her trembling hands against the wound in his side. "No, you cannot leave me again, not now." His grey eyes, clouded with pain, found hers. "Winifred," he managed. "I'm sorry." "Don't you dare apologize," she said fiercely, as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Don't you dare leave me when I've only just found you again." The physicians arrived quickly, hustling the Duke into a private chamber, while Winifred waited outside, still in her blood-stained wedding gown, refusing all attempts to make her retire to Stratham House. "We are not yet married," she told her frantic mother. "I have no right to enter his home as its mistress." "But the scandal—" "Hang the scandal," Winifred said with sudden vehemence. "I care only whether he lives or dies." Hours passed. The church emptied of wedding guests, though news of the dramatic interruption spread through London like wildfire. As twilight gathered, the physician finally emerged, looking weary but satisfied. "His Grace will recover," he announced. The ball passed through his side without striking any vital organs. With proper care and rest, he should heal completely. "May I see him?" Winifred asked, not caring that her voice broke on the words. The physician hesitated, then nodded, briefly. "He's been asking for you." Xavier lay on a makeshift bed, his complexion alarmingly pale against the dark sheets, but his eyes were clear when they met hers. "Winifred," he said softly, "you're still here." She moved to his side, taking his hand between both of hers. "Where else would I be?" "I believe we have some unfinished business with the bishop," he said, wincing slightly as he attempted to shift position. "The wedding can wait until you're recovered." "No," his fingers tightened around hers. "I've waited 5 years to make you my wife. I refuse to wait another day." "You've been shot," she reminded him, torn between exasperation and tender concern. "A minor inconvenience." The familiar sardonic smile touched his lips. "Besides, I understand that marriages performed under dramatic circumstances are invariably successful." Winifred found herself laughing through tears. "You're impossible. And yet you came to marry me this morning, even knowing that I once left without explanation." Her expression softened. "Your letter explained enough. You left to protect me, and returned because I could not stay away." His gaze held hers. "I love you, Winifred Ellis. I loved you 5 years ago, and I love you still. If you'll have me, I promise never to leave your side again." The words she had never expected to hear, had convinced herself she did not want to hear, melted the last of her carefully constructed defenses. "I love you too," she whispered, bending to press her lips gently to his. "Though you are still an insufferable aristocrat." "With the emotional depth of a teaspoon?" he queried, eyebrow raised. "Perhaps slightly deeper, a tablespoon at least." Their laughter, soft and intimate, sealed a promise that no bullet could shatter. The wedding took place that very evening in the small antechamber where Xavier rested, with only family and the necessary witnesses present. The Duke recited his vows from a prone position, but with unwavering conviction. Winifred, still in her blood-stained gown, had never felt more beautiful than when he slid the ring onto her finger and called her his Duchess for the first time. News of the dramatic wedding spread throughout London, transforming what might have been a scandal into a romantic legend. The story grew with each telling, how the Duke had taken a bullet to protect his bride, how the new Duchess had refused to leave his side, how they had exchanged vows while he still bled from his wounds. Edward Sherborne faced transportation for attempted murder, his wild accusations against the Duke dismissed as the ravings of a desperate, debt-ridden man. The truth of his earlier schemes against Winifred never became public knowledge, preserved as a private understanding between husband and wife. 6 weeks later, as spring blossoms appeared in London's parks, the Duke and Duchess of Stratham held their first reception at Stratham House. Winifred, resplendent in Duchess, sat in the colour of new leaves, moved among their guests with a newfound confidence, while Xavier watched her with unconcealed admiration. "You seem exceptionally pleased with yourself, Your Grace," she murmured when they found a moment alone in the library. "I have every reason to be." He drew her into the circle of his arms. "I have the most intelligent, beautiful, and forthright Duchess in England. And I have a Duke who proved to have the emotional depth of an entire soup tureen," she replied with a smile that held no trace of her former cynicism. "Who would have thought it possible?" "I knew it from the first moment I met you," Xavier said, his expression serious despite his light tone. "You were the only woman in London who saw past the title to the man beneath." "A man worth waiting for," Winifred said softly, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Outside the library doors, the reception continued in a swirl of music and conversation, but within their private sanctuary, the Duke and Duchess of Stratham had created a world of their own, one built not on the business of marriage, but on the far more substantial foundation of understanding, forgiveness, and love that had survived 5 years of separation to emerge stronger than ever. And if in years to come their children asked how they came to be married, the Duchess would smile and tell them, "Your father fractured my heart at the altar, but his secret letter revealed his true love, and that, my dears, made all the difference."